Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Kevin Moore Show. Now, if you want to stay up to date with all my latest videos, just click that subscribe button below, as it really helps to support the show. If you're new to the show, I interview guests from a spiritual perspective, covering mainstream and alternative subjects. Now, on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Terry Lovelace. Now, Terry is a 6-year veteran of the United States Air Force, and he completed a bachelor's degree in psychology at Park University in 1979. Now, he retired in 2012 as an assistant attorney general for the state of Vermont. Terry joins me today to discuss his 1977 UFO abduction story. Terry Lovelace, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's a privilege.
So, Terry, you've done 2 books, correct?
I have,
Yep.
yes.
And just name those 2 books for us.
Sure. The first is Incident at Devil's Den. Incident at Devil's Den. The second is Devil's Den, The Reckoning. Devil's Den is the first book, Incident at Devil's Den, and then Devil's Den, The Reckoning is the second.
And if you were to give a very short synopsis, just very briefly, what they are about.
Certainly. Incident at Devil's Den details my encounters with non-human entities dating back to my early childhood. And then dramatically in 1977, while I was an active duty member of the United States Air Force, a friend and I were abducted. And that was a life-changing event.
And that friend's name was?
Tobias.
Tobias. Is Tobias still with us?
Toby is not with us anymore. Toby passed away September of 2007.
Okay. Sorry to hear that. Okay. So what would you say then is a really important message of why you're doing what you're doing by talking about your experiences?
You know, I want to make it clear that I never intended to speak about this. I never intended to write a book about this in any way. But in October 2012, I had an injury to my knee. Actually, I had a cyst in my knee. And when they did an x-ray of my right knee, by happenstance, they discovered 2 what they called anomalies in my leg. And I knew what they were. They knew what they were, I think. They weren't natural to the human body. One was a square structure with wires attached, the one above my knee. And the thing below my knee is a little floret pattern of what appears to be bone tissue, dead center in my calf muscle. And those can be seen at terrylovelace.com. That was the catalyst. That was validation that these things had put their hands on me. And I had trouble reconciling that. And I made a decision I was retired. I was no longer worried about, a backlash from the legal community or losing my government job. So
that was the right time. But what would you say is the important message of what you're doing right now? What's really driving you, do you think, to do what you're doing?
I feel compelled to tell this story and for as many people to hear it as possible, to know that this stuff is real. I think it's happened to many, many people who, like me, sat in silence for 45 years and suffer from nightmares. And, if something, they may not even realize it. I mean, you could be carrying something in your subconscious that can leak up to your conscious mind and manifest in unhealthy ways. So this is important. I think that this is an awakening, kind of. I think we're going to see dramatic things happen in the next 12 months.
Okay, that's interesting that you say that. So are you married or?
Yes, I am. I've been married to, we were friends in high school, dated, and we've been married 47 years.
Excellent.
So,
Okay.
Yeah, my wife was with me during this event. I mean, we were together. She wasn't with me when I was abducted. But
So she was married with you when you were serving in the services?
She was.
Yeah, okay. And did she know about your abduction?
Oh, yes. And she's been a source of support ever since. She knows I have screaming nightmares once or twice a year. She knows I have certain phobias that I think are PTSD related. But otherwise, with her support, I've had a good life.
Okay. Any kids?
Oh yes, we have 2 adult children, 37 and 40, and they live here in Dallas region with us, and grandkids, and we're very tight knit. We're a package, you know.
So what was the point then when you realized that you had these implants in your leg? Was that due to damaging yourself with marathon running or something?
I had quit running at that point. I'd had a heart attack in 2005, and I was a walker, but I didn't run anymore. But it was curious because the object above my knee, when I would run, because I became a runner in 1979, and I didn't run marathons, but I ran just about every day. And when I saw that x-ray, it hit me that there's a spot on my knee and lateral that would go numb every time I ran. I mean, every single time. And right at the 2-mile mark in my run, I mean, give or take 50 yards, and I could take a safety pin and delineate the edges of it. And that lay directly above the object in my right leg.
Okay, let's get into your story then, because all this, which we're touching upon here, we're gonna come back into. Okay, so you say you had experiences when you were younger, and when did those memories come back? Would you say, and what were those experiences?
They were odd. They were as a young child, I would have. As a child, I called them the monkey men. You know, children name things with what they have vocabulary-wise. That's what I chose. And these 4 little circus monkeys would step out of the shadows in my room and ask me to go play with them. And sometimes I did. And sometimes I screamed my head off.
When you say you went to play with them, what was that involving then? Outside?
I was taken. Yeah, I was taken out of the house. I don't know how I was taken, but I was taken to a domed white room with a gray rubberized floor. And there were other children there that I didn't know, that weren't in my school, my preschool, or kids from the neighborhood. I did not know them. But we became good friends.
Good friends in what way? On the what I want to say, craft, or
wherever we were. Yeah, we became kind of tight, and all these other kids were in their night clothes, just like I was, and we communicated telepathically. And I've had a lot of people write to me. I put an email on the back of Incident at Devil's Den, and I said, "Look, if you've had an experience like mine, tell me about it. I'd love to hear." Since 2018, I've got over 1,700 emails from people. And I've got a lot of them who tell me they experienced a similar thing. You know, they may not have seen monkeys. I think that these things appear in a form that the child will find most benign.
Yeah, that's difficult to even wrap your head around. And when were these memories coming back to you? I mean, these weren't memories that you were, as a child, you were like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember, going out with the monkeys and, off wherever. When was these memories coming back?
I remember the monkey men clearly, from my room. My memory in details of being 4 and 5 aboard that ship or whatever it was came flooding back after I wrote the book and started to speak publicly about it.
Okay, so after you wrote the book, that's when some of these memories came back. But were these detailed in the book? Had you remembered when writing the book, or what we're talking about? No.
Some of it, no. That was another reason I wrote the second book, was to fill people in on what was missing from the first, because I recovered memories since, and I know that these aren't fabrication. These aren't confabulation of any kind. These are facts. These I believe are true memories.
Well, facts to you, of course, true memories to you, but obviously not provable. But you're willing to come out and talk about it, so it's something, isn't it?
It is, and I want to be clear from the start. I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. My experiences were totally subjective. I don't have an objective observer here to validate for you what happened to me. I can just tell you honestly and without embellishment what my experience was.
Any regression on those experiences?
One, I had an incident that occurred on April 16th of 2019. I have a health app on my iPhone, and I sleep at night because I have heart disease. I have a shielded iPhone. I sleep with it in my pocket with earbuds, and hooked up to the so the battery won't run down because it is an Apple. And I listen to meditative apps at night, and it keeps the ambient noise of the house out. And I sleep better. Otherwise, every time there's a noise or a creak or anything in the house, and on April 16, 2019, my health app showed that at 5:23 a.m., I was 60 feet above my house between 5:23 and 5:24 a.m. I have pictures of that health app in the second book. And I was regressed on that issue by a board certified psychiatrist here in Dallas, who happens to be a friend. And in his office, he regressed me. He also is an MD, of course, and as a medical doctor, he monitored my blood pressure throughout the thing. And I had a little trouble getting relaxed, but the images that he kind of drew out of my memory were of going up through, and I know this sounds unlikely, but I went up through the ceiling and into the sky, and it was just breaking dawn, and there was a round craft above me, and at the bottom of it opened like a camera lens or an iris of an eye. It just expanded, and it was black inside. And I had a spike in my blood pressure, and he said, "We're going to call that a day." This is all being recorded, and I'm going to have a second session soon. We took a break because of COVID, kind of messed us up.
No, completely understood. With the regression, I wonder how much we pull that out of the mind and how much is reality, or if any is reality, or if it's nothing that which happened, but it's only your or the mind's way of trying to understand it, and it actually wasn't what the regression was, but you're not able to go to that part because it's actually something beyond our understanding.
Well, I wasn't able to go any further because my blood pressure spiked to like 210 over 110 suddenly, and
I get that.
He halted
I get
the
that,
session.
but what I'm saying is, could you go down the road that either it never happened and it's just a creation of the mind, or something else happened and it's not what you think it is, it's something else, maybe something even more incredible, but this is the way that we perceive it to be when the regression happens. I guess what I'm saying
And that
is,
could be.
yeah,
I get your point. Yeah. The only objective proof I have is that I sleep with a t-shirt on, and I sleep with my iPhone in my pocket. So that's why my iPhone's health app registered that I had climbed 6 flights of stairs, and I took my phone to Apple, and I said, "There's got to be a problem here. I live in a house in Texas with no stairs, and I certainly don't climb stairs at 5:23 a.m." The phone was checked, the app was checked, and according to the technician, she says this phone was 60 feet above your house in the minute between 5:23 and 5:24 a.m. And that's all I can say. As far as the validity of the memories, who knows? I don't even know. I see things. I register objects, and but we can never really even witness anything in real time. I mean, by the time the images on my laptop get to my retina and to my optic nerve and into my brain, time has passed. So everything I see, I'm seeing in history. So who knows? I don't know. It's a good question. It is a very good question, and I don't know the answer.
I guess, with you having a law background as well, then there would have been a lot of people that said to you, "Do you believe me? I'm telling you the truth." And I guess you're on that side of it now, aren't you? Like, you are, as far as you're aware, and you can do nothing but just be honest about it. And I suppose who wouldn't want to share something this incredible? Do you know what I mean? Because of what this could potentially mean, and we'll get into that as well, right? But going back, let's just go back a little bit here, right? So you initially went into the service. What service did you go into? The Navy, was it?
The Air Force.
The Air Force. I don't know
Yes.
why I said the Navy there. I must have my documentary Mark Richards on my mind, who pretends that he went into the Navy when he didn't. And the Air Force, right? Okay. And how many years did you serve in the Air Force?
6 years, from 1973 to 1979, active
Okay.
duty.
And then you got into law. I mean, you must have took the bar then.
Well, yes. Well, I had to finish an undergraduate degree. I have an undergraduate degree in psychology, and then
Oh,
I got accepted to law school. So it was 4 years of undergrad, 3 years of law school, then the bar exam.
not an easy exam by any means.
No, I passed it the first time, but I credit that with study, diligent study.
Diligent study, yeah, you put the hard work in, absolutely, yeah, yeah. And the debt that's associated with that as well for doing it. But I'm sure it was well worth it. I think it's a great thing to do. And you became, well, you tell us, from getting your bar, where did you sort of retire from? What sort of position in law?
Sure. When I was first licensed, I was licensed in the state of Michigan, where I went to law school. And I worked in private practice, had my own private practice for a short time. And I was offered a position as Assistant Attorney General for the United States territory of American Samoa, which is the only U.S. territory south of the equator, a little spit of an island in the South Pacific, kind of into Tonga, Fiji, Western Samoa area, 2,500 miles south of Hawaii. And I was there for 5.5 years. That was wonderful duty. Wonderful job. I enjoyed it very much.
I bet it was. I can only imagine. But what did you retire as then? What was your sort of last job?
Oh, I'm sorry. I moved from the island. There were some earthquake issues. I moved from the island and went to the state of Vermont, and was there until I retired in 2012.
Okay, so
I was state's attorney for their board of medical practice.
wow. Okay. So, yeah, pretty solid background. That's why I want to just mention that as well. Let's go to 1977 then. Let's talk about your abduction from Devil's Den while you were on active duty.
Yes, I worked the night shift. I was a medic and EMT, first responder, and I worked the night shift in an emergency room. I drove an ambulance with my friend Tobias. We worked together on the night shift for 3 years, and he had this idea that we should go camping. And we were city kids. Neither one of us had ever been camping, but he was obsessed with taking this camping trip. And we drove 6.5 hours south to Devil's Den State Park, and we dodged the ranger station and did not stay in the campground. We wanted to be, outdoorsmen. In the campground, you have someone to the right of you, someone to the left of you, and children running around, and it's just not. And he wanted to be in a spot where he could have a view of the night sky without light pollution, because his goal in life was to be an astronomer or work in cosmology, get a degree in physics, and then do some graduate work. So we found an elevated plateau. We trespassed, actually. There was a chain across the road. We got around it. The land we were on actually wasn't even in Devil's Den State Park. It's federal land owned by the Bureau of Land Management. And we were trespassing. We kind of knew we were trespassing. We just thought it was a nature preserve or something. And, we weren't going to leave a mess or hurt anything. And we found this plateau, this high plateau, and you can't see it from the ground because it's level with the tops of the trees surrounding it. So you have to be right up on it to find it. And we found it, and we drove on top of it, and the view was spectacular, and we were miles from anywhere. It was a remote area, and we set up our little camp there and did all the fun things that you do when you camp, because it was all new to us. And then about 9 o'clock that evening, we were laying on these air mattresses with a campfire between us and a tent in back of us. And we're just talking, we're just having a conversation. And I noticed that I had to keep my voice raised because, and this sounds cliche, but I swear that this is true. There were crickets and tree frogs and all kinds of things in the forest that make noise at night. And they were loud. They were loud enough that we had trouble carrying on a conversation without raised voices. And those went still. There came a lull in our conversation, and I realized that it was suddenly dead quiet. And that unnerved me. I didn't like that. That felt unnatural to me. And we even lost a little bit of breeze that we had. And if it weren't for the crackle of the campfire, it would have been like being in a sound booth. It struck me as odd. But my friend was like, don't worry about the bugs. They'll come back. We've just been laughing and we've quieted them and they'll come back. So I tried not to. And we carried on a conversation for a minute or two. And then he turns his head to the left and he's fixated on something. And he asked me, he said, Terry, were those lights there before? And I'm like, what lights? I didn't know of any lights that were visible from where we were. But his torso was in the way from where I was sitting on my air mattress. So I stood up and took a step back, and I could see in the horizon this tight little triangle of 3 stars. And they were too far above the horizon to have been lights from a train or a parking lot or something. And they just looked like they didn't belong there. And my friend was the amateur astronomer, and I asked him, I said, are these stars or what? And he said, no, these don't belong here. I don't know what they are. And while we're watching them, they rotated. They turned like they were on an axis and did about a 120-degree turn and aligned the base of the triangle parallel with the horizon with an apex pointed up. And it started to move up into the sky. And we watched, and we were pretty certain that this was one single object and not 3 moving in unison. As it got higher into the sky, well, we could see the sky there were 1 trillion stars out that night. We could see the sky was blue, but the area inside this triangle was black. And it reached an altitude I'll call a ceiling. And I have no way, this is a guess. I don't know. I'm guessing it was about 10,000 feet over our heads. And then it changed orientation from straight up to parallel with the earth. And then began like a glide plane in our direction. And it got bigger as it came down. And it did this weird tumbling thing twice, where the point that was headed in our direction, the point of the triangle, would dip down and do a complete somersault. And it did that twice while it was gliding down. And I felt that it was doing that for our benefit. It was telling us that it's moving with intent and purpose. It's not just out of control. And it glided in. And I don't know how high the elevation of this plateau was, but we were level with the tops of the trees of the forest. And this thing glided in and came to a dead stop right over this little, I called it a meadow, came to an abrupt stop. And we were just in a strange place. This needs a little bit of explanation. When that thing started to move up into the sky, all of that anxiety that I felt earlier, that unsettled feeling because of the abrupt silence, that all disappeared. And I felt this sensation of calm wash over me. And also kind of a dissociative feeling, kind of like I was an observer, not a participant. It's a weird thing to explain. And my friend was in the same place. And I think that speaks to the influence that these things have over us, because that's not normal human behavior. I mean, we should have been, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Is that real? What is that? Validating each other's observations and speculating, what is it? There was none of that. We sat there mostly in quiet and just watched. And it parked over the top of this meadow, came to a complete stop, and it shined some lights down at us. And it was 3,000, I'm estimating, but I think I'm pretty close. It was about 3,000 feet above us. And we had camped off to the side near the tree line. So thankfully, it wasn't directly over our heads. But we were completely unaffected by it, almost disinterested. It's strange. And that feeling of calm transitioned to sleepy. And abruptly, suddenly, both of us, all I wanted to do was shut my eyes. I didn't care about this thing 3,000 feet over our heads. And so we both went to the tent, threw our air mattresses in. I didn't bother to undress, take my shirt off, or unlace my boots, which does come into play. And I fell on top of that air mattress and I was out. And I think I was unconscious. I don't think I was asleep. And that's when they took us.
At the time, prior to seeing the sighting, had you been drinking, doing any recreational drugs, or
No.
no? Okay.
We as first responders, I was stationed on a nuclear base. We were routinely tested for drugs, so that would not have worked. But I wasn't, as an adolescent, or I was never a drug user. I would have a beer or two at a barbecue, maybe. And Toby drank less than I drank. We did have some beer. I think we didn't have a full 6-pack. I think we had 5 beers with us. And we drank 2 that night and going to save the rest. So, no, we weren't under the influence.
No, well, I just need to. Well, I just was curious. That's all. Just in case. I mean,
it's a good question.
I don't think it takes away much from your experience, to be honest. But yeah. So, okay, what do you remember next? What was the next thing to happen then?
The next thing I remember was I woke up and I did not have my wits about me. And I woke up to these flashing lights, these brilliant flashing lights that were white and yellow and orange, right through the canvas of the tent. And inside the tent was almost pitch black until these lights would flash, and then it lit up the entire inside of the tent for a millisecond. And I'm thinking, I thought that maybe they were the overhead flashing lights of a park ranger's truck there to kick us out. That's what I thought they were at first. And I sat up, and in one of these flashes of light, I noticed that my boots had been unlaced almost all the way down. Now, I knew that I didn't go to bed like that. I didn't fall asleep like that. And I wasn't afraid, but I was confused and a bit annoyed. And I took my boots off, and my socks were on sideways. Now, I would never have done that. But still, it didn't sink in that we'd been undressed and redressed. So I took my socks off and put them on appropriately and put my boots on, laced them up. And then I turned my attention to my friend, and I could see tracks of tears down the right side of his face. And he's fixated looking at something outside of the flap of the tent on his side. And I asked him, Toby, I said, Toby, what is it, man? Is it park rangers? Who's out there? And he didn't answer me other than to say, shh, I think they might still be out there. And I'm like, who's still out there? And I'm getting nowhere with this conversation. He's in some kind of shock or something. So I pull back the flap on my tent on my side. And what I saw was that this big open meadow in front of us, that this thing that had been at 3,000 feet had descended and was now 30 feet over the floor of the meadow. That was the first thing I saw. And the second thing that I saw was what I first took to be a dozen, maybe 15 children. And at the flashes of light, I could see some of them, but I didn't look that closely. And I said, Toby, man, what are these kids doing out here in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere? And he said to me, Terry, man, those ain't no little kids. Look at them. They're not human beings. Don't you remember? They took us and they hurt us. And when he said that, my fear level went from a 2 to a 10. And I looked, and these were not human beings. They were, in the flashes of light, I could see them. Otherwise, it was dark and I could only see them in silhouette. But when the flashes of light were bright, I could see them for a millisecond, and they were gray. I don't know if their bodies were gray or they were wearing gray garments. I wasn't close enough to discern that. But their heads were disproportionately large to their body. They had long limbs, very thin torso, and they walked with a distinctive gait. They walked like their legs were hinged to move backward or something. The gait was really unusual. And now I'm terrified that we're going to cough or sneeze and draw their attention to us, and they're going to come over and check us out. And we had no way of knowing. They were long done with us at this point. So we watched, and we saw this thing take off. What happened was, again, it's 30 feet off the floor of the metal, and from underneath this thing, there was a light about 30 feet in diameter. It was about as wide as this thing was tall off the floor of the metal, and it was a cylinder of white visible light. It had that same quality that a high-power searchlight has when it cuts through fog. It creates a column of visible white light. Of course, there was no fog. It was just this visible white light. And the second that clicked on, all of these little guys in the metal turned their attention to it. And they were all scattered all over the meadow, and they were paired up like in twos and threes, and they all began to walk towards this light, not in a hurry or a run, but walk slowly toward this light. And when they got to it, they would step in twos or threes, and they would pixelate out and be gone. And we watched this over the span of several minutes until the last pair pixelated out and were gone. And the moment they were gone, this light turned off, and we saw this thing take off. And it did not take off like a rocket ship. It just lifted off like a hot air balloon slowly and rotated a bit and went straight up. And the higher it got, the faster it got. And we watched it until it was 3 points of light and then 1 point of light, and then it was gone. And we sat in that tent like two scared 10-year-olds. And I was all I had over my head was a piece of canvas. We had no way of knowing what time it was. Looking back, it was about an hour before daylight. We were both in a lot of pain. I had the worst sunburn of my life. I never peeled, I never blistered, but I was burned every part of my body. I mean, under my arms, soles of my feet, everywhere. And we also suffered severe dehydration and what the doctors called flash burns. They're burns to the cornea of the eye. It's the same type of burn that an arc welder would get if they didn't wear that hood with the smoked glass on it. And that's very painful. It feels like you have sand in your eyes, and you're very photophobic. The sun was just murder. And so we were hurting. And I didn't want to leave the tent. I told Toby, let's stay here till daylight. We both wore nice mechanical watches because they were integral to the job that we did. And both of our watches had stopped. Mine had stopped at 2:40. Toby stopped at 2:41. And those watches never worked again. And so I don't know how long we were in this thing. I don't know when we were taken. I've got no point of reference to know that.
What were your conversations sort of, straight after and then as the weeks went by as well?
Well, straight after it was just fear. It was just absolute fear, fear for our lives. And I still have a phobia. The conversation, let me go back to the conversation. The conversation was, I wanted to stay in the tent until it was daylight because I was afraid to be out in the open without a canvas over my head. I'd feel vulnerable in that 60-foot run to the car. I didn't want to do that. And my friend Toby was, no, man, we got to get out of here now. And I had concern that we could navigate. We were driving my old 66 Impala Chevrolet, and I had concerns that we could get out of there at night and not break an axle or something because it was rough terrain. But Toby was the one with the good sense of direction. He got us there. He said, look, I can get us out of here. Let's go now. And we debated that for a while. And I finally acquiesced, and we ran to the car and got in and got out of there and drove north and back to the base. Conversation in the car. This is something I had trouble reconciling back then, and I can't reconcile to this day. And that is that here is this guy that I worked with for 3 years. We were friends. Our wives were friends. We were both newly married. And, we worked together. We associated together on our off days and played volleyball, barbecued, did all the fun stuff you can do. And suddenly I had this feeling I wanted nothing to do with the guy. And I found out that that's not all that uncommon.
And all these years later, why do you think that was?
I think that's the level of influence that these things have. I have probably 100 letters from people who report having an experience with a group of friends. And then afterward, I call it the band breaks up. Everybody goes in a different direction. I got in my second book from these emails that people sent me who wanted to share their stories, some anonymously, some with their real name. I've got many examples of this. And there's a gentleman by the name of Robert Hastings who wrote a book about 15 years ago called UFOs and Nukes. And we've become friends. And he actually wrote the foreword that's going to be on the audiobook coming out soon. And he told me that that's not uncommon. He said that's absolutely the norm. And if you read Ray Fowler's book about the Allagash Four, it happened there too. And there are lots of examples. I think Betty and Barney Hill are a sterling example to the contrary. I mean, they continued to have a marital relationship and were fine. But I've had people email me with stories about a group, a family group, mom, dad, a couple of kids, see something. I'm not just talking about a saucer darting across the sky. I'm talking about something at a little more intimate level, something closer, maybe some missing time, something strange happens. The family won't talk about it. And I've got examples of that too. And in this one example, the family didn't talk about it until, 20 some years later at a holiday party. Uncle Joe or somebody spoke up and said, hey, do you remember when we saw that thing when we were, and everybody got uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So do you think that had that incident not happened, where do you think your life would have taken you? Do you think you'd have still chosen the career path in law?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd made that decision. By the time I was 9, I wanted to be a trial lawyer. And that was from, I was having these nightmares, and my parents forbid me from watching, Space Ghost cartoons, Lost in Space, any of the space programs that were playing on television in the 60s. I used to watch those, and they thought that that's what was giving me these nightmares and these delusions about the monkey men in my room. So they told me to watch The Three Stooges. That's what I was allowed to watch. And after about 4 weeks, Moe, Larry, and Curly were on everybody's last nerve. And they said, no, you got to watch something else. So my dad turned on Perry Mason, and I'm like, Perry Mason, this is boring stuff. But I started watching it and following the plot line and liked it. I thought it was pretty good.
How many people did you share the story with in the early days, pretty much very soon after it happened? I mean, we mentioned your wife at the time, but was there any other sort of colleagues that you shared it with?
My colleagues at the hospital, because we worked in the hospital squadron, did not know about it except for one doctor and one nurse. And it was a taboo topic in the Air Force in 1977. If you had said that you'd seen a flying saucer or a spaceship like we saw, you would have been sent for a psychological evaluation and most likely discharged from the service. So we made a pact on the way back. That was the only conversation we had, really. We made a pact between us that And we didn't want to lie. We wanted to be honest about it.
You just
So
made the pact to not talk about it.
yes, what we said, we would tell the doctors we felt funny and went to bed, because that's true. And we woke up feeling sick, and that's true. And then we drove back. And I might add that we left the tent, his cooler, his backpack. We left everything there. We just got out of there with our lives. I kept my wallet and my keys.
Right, right. And then obviously sometime in the future, how many years later was it until you actually returned to that spot again?
I've never been back. I've never been back. Next year will be the 45th anniversary, and I'm considering going back, and maybe with some night vision goggles, and maybe if somebody would like to film it. I want to go back with a group of people. I know it probably makes no difference in the world, but I would feel more comfortable with a firearm. I intend to take that. And I feel kind of compelled to go back now. So next year.
Thank you. So how many years, if we just fast forward now, was it until you sort of, started having flashbacks? So had you buried it for a long time, do you think?
The flashbacks came fairly suddenly. I mean, or not for suddenly. Fairly soon after the event, about 6 months afterward, I started having, I had two things. I had nightmares, and I had the same nightmares play out. And once they'd start, I couldn't stop them, and I'd wake up screaming. The second thing I had was what you called flashbacks, and that's the correct name for them. I thought of them as intrusive thoughts. I could be, mowing the grass, or, playing volleyball, or doing whatever, or running, and thinking about whatever. And suddenly I would have a flashback of Devil's Den, mostly just a millisecond, a flash of memory or two. And I called those intrusive thoughts, and they were very unsettling. And of course, they were flashbacks. They confirmed that I had PTSD both in the 80s and in the 90s. I was tested for it twice with MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which is kind of in psychology, I guess it's kind of the industry standard as a diagnostic tool. So.
And when you had these recalls, what were you actually recalling then that was different to what you remembered at the time?
A couple of things in more detail, but not very much. I've never had a clear linear memory of what happened to us. I only have bits and pieces. And I have memory of being inside that thing. And I can tell you about that and share some of those with you, because that's a subject
very briefly,
of my
yeah. Just tell us about that, please.
Yes. A common nightmare that I have is when I was, Toby and I was aware that Toby was next to me. We were nude and holding our clothing in our arms in front of our chest like this. And I couldn't move a muscle. I was paralyzed. I could, however, move my eyes and roll my eyes around and look at the room we were in. We were in like an atrium. And this thing looked much bigger on the inside than it did from the outside. And I don't know if maybe they took us to another location, or if maybe they just have a different set of physics than we have, or what. But the inside of this thing was huge. And I saw the little gray guys running around all over the place. And I have a theory about them. Just real quick, I want to add that, and I think people tell me, no, I saw gray. This, you're completely wrong. Well, I think there's probably a dozen varieties of grays. I don't know. But all I know is what I saw. And the things that I saw, I don't believe were sentient in the way that you and I are. I think they're manufactured products. Nanotechnology and, AI and who knows what. But I think that they are not living beings. I think they're task-oriented. In my book, I refer to them as drones or worker bees. That was my impression. Could be totally wrong. It's an assumption on my part, but that was the impression that I had. I saw one being about 6 foot tall who had a chalkish white, pinkish complexion, not gray at all, 6 foot tall, and passed close enough in front of me that I could see that he was wearing a gray garment with a V-neck. And he was frightening. I couldn't move my head, but I could move my eyes. And he walked to the left of my field of vision, and I turned my eyes as far left as I could. And by happenstance, we just momentarily locked eyes. And that was the most frightening thing that I recall because, and this is hard to wrap your head around too, but when we locked eyes, I felt this guy in my head. I felt like he knew me, he knew my wife, he knew my secrets, my dreams, he knew everything about me. And I felt so inferior. I felt, and that's a major epiphany to realize that human beings are not the top of the food chain. And I just felt inadequate in every way to him, certainly intellectually. You know what I felt like? I felt like I have an English setter, and I pet her on the head, and she looks up at me with those big brown eyes that radiate loyalty. But we each know our respective roles. She knows I'm the alpha. And when I locked eyes with this thing, I was the dog, no question.
What was the technology like around you? Was it understandable?
Everything that was inside that I could see, understand, I couldn't rotate my head, so my field of view was limited. Everything was either gray, stainless steel, or white. And we were in an open atrium. I don't know how high it went because I couldn't tilt my head back. But there were walkways that wound around all over the ship. I could see these many different levels. And in the distance to my left, I saw 3 parked flying saucers lined up. I mean, like aircraft under a carrier deck. I mean, they were just parked there. And there were what looked like all the world to be garage doors in front of them. It was obvious that they were able to come and go.
But again, nothing felt conscious in a sense. Everything felt devoid of that spark of, you described there that everything was almost robotic in a sense, nanotechnology, something beyond our understanding. But that's my assumption about the grays. The 6 foot tall, chalkish pink entity that I saw was absolutely a sentient thinking being, no doubt in my mind. That thing was alive and aware, and as I said, superior to me in every way. And these recollections came over a lot of time, yeah?
The recollection of being inside the ship, I remembered almost the same instant that Toby said, "Don't you remember? They took us and they hurt us." I had that flash of memory immediately of being inside this thing and holding my clothes. Yeah.
And then the further memories, what were they? What were some of the further, deeper, repressed ones that have come out more over time?
And I should add 2 things to this to bolster my credibility, because I think that's necessary, and that is that I kept a journal. I thought it was important to record everything that witnessed and happened to me, and I did that, and I kept that journal. So that was a great help to me in 2016 when I started writing this book. So because I was able to recall things I would not have been able to recall otherwise. So that's how I was able to get so much detail.
And name something really out there that just sort of blew you away when you record it.
The most outrageous thing was they took me down a hallway, and there were white wall to my left with like stainless steel braces every 12 feet or so, long hallway. And there were what looked like aquariums to my right, but I couldn't turn my head and look at them. And at the end of the hallway was an exam room, and there was a table there, an exam table. And they took my clothes from me and laid me on top of this exam table. But it had a very clinical vibe to it. It did not, I knew I wasn't there for a torture session, that they weren't going to kill me. It felt very clinical.
Was anything extracted?
I don't know what exactly they did to me because I was paralyzed, but I can tell you it hurt a lot. They did something to my lower back, and it felt like they cut me at the base of my spine. And it was very painful. And my jaws, I can't open my mouth to scream, but I'm screaming through clenched teeth. And the thing that's operating on me is about 7 foot tall, and it is an absolute insectoid-like being. It looked like a praying mantis. It had a green triangular shaped head, two large bulbous eyes. And I picture this thing being in a white lab coat every time. And I don't think he was wearing a white lab coat. I think that that's a screen image. Somehow they want to put that clinical vibe in it. And I'm thinking, why can't you guys anesthetize me? I'm angry and I'm screaming because they're hurting me. And I couldn't understand why they couldn't anesthetize me. And I'm screaming. And I think my screaming annoyed what I've come to call Dr. Bug, because this thing turned this big triangular head toward me. And from its left eye, we locked eyes. And I heard him with crystal clarity inside my head say, "Why are you screaming? Stop screaming. You know we don't hurt you. You know we take you back. Now stop screaming." And he tapped me on top of the head and I was unconscious. And my next memory from that was waking up outside next to my car, but not completely conscious, semi-conscious. And I remember thinking somebody screwed up. They should have put us back in the tent. And sure enough, 4 of these little guys came along and dragged us and put us back in the tent.
That being was saying to you, be quiet, there's no pain. What? And you're saying that it hurt like hell, whatever they did to your lower back. Were you in pain then?
Absolutely, I was in pain.
Then why did they contradict the opposite though?
Well, they didn't tell me I wasn't in pain. His words were, "Why are you screaming? You know we don't hurt you," but I think what they meant is permanently hurt me. I don't think they were talking about what they were doing. What they were saying was, "You're not going to lose a limb. We're not going to take out half your brain." That's the impression that I got, that
And
they don't permanently hurt you.
when you were fully conscious, there was no pain. When you were back, outside the tent, in the tent, wherever you were,
The only pain that I experienced, the pain in my lower back, I didn't experience at all. Although I did have early onset of arthritic changes to my lower spine. But we were in pain from the burns that we had. I don't know if they were radiation or what they were caused from, but the skin burns were very painful and we were acutely dehydrated. So that's what we were dealing with. But this guy said, "You know we don't hurt you. You know we take you back." And that's always troubled me, because that means that at some time before we'd had this interaction. And I have no memory of that whatsoever.
Moving this forward then, with Toby. Now, just remind me again, what year did Toby pass away?
2007, September 2007.
2007. Had you had chance before that to have recollections and talks about what had happened with Toby?
Yeah, that needs explaining. And if you read anything by Robert Hastings, it'll validate what happened and why. When two people in the military have an experience, and they knew, I don't know how they knew, but they knew that we'd had an experience. When we got back home, we lived on base in family housing. He lived about 4 blocks from me. I dropped him off at his house. I went home. Our wives took us immediately to the hospital because we were sick. We were severely dehydrated. We had elevated temperature. And I was in an exam. They put me in an exam room and put Toby in another exam room. And we're members of the hospital squadron. We know all these people. And the hospital commander, who I knew well, came into the exam room toward the end of one of the most thorough medical exams I've ever had in my life. And he said, "Sergeant Lovelace should have no contact with Sergeant Tobias in no way, shape, or form." He says, "Not verbally, not in writing. You're not to give him anything. He's not to give you anything. You're not to attempt to contact him through third parties. If you run into him at the base exchange, you're to immediately turn around and walk in the opposite direction," and on and on and on and on. And he said, "And that's an order, Sergeant. And if you disobey my order, there will be consequences. Do you understand?" And I mean, number one, yeah, I understood consequences. And number two, I was in a strange place. I really didn't care to see the guy anyway. So, and they cut orders to transfer him, PCS they call it, transfer him to Japan at light speed, and he was gone. And in a matter of weeks. And I'm also told that that's very, very common. So I did see Toby. one time, and I can tell you about his demise. And He, as I said, he lived 4 blocks from me, and I really didn't want anything to do with the guy, but I was struggling. I couldn't sleep. I had my struggles with this, and I thought that if I could stop by and see him, because we never had a chance to debrief. We spent 6 hours in the car. Human nature would be to validate the experience and say, man, did you see what I saw? And how about this? How about that? There was none of that. None of it. We didn't speak about it. Other than making the pact not to talk about it, we didn't discuss it. So I felt that if I could stop by his house, I wanted to stop by his house, shake his hand, wish him well on his next assignment. I felt like I could get some kind of closure with this. And it didn't work that way. And we were coming home from the grocery store. My wife was driving, and I asked her, I said, drop me off at Toby's. And she's like, oh, don't mess with these OSI people, the security police. Don't mess with them. And I'm like, look, I'm gonna run in and say goodbye to my friend. I'll be 4 minutes. Nobody will be the wiser. So she was reluctant, but she stopped. And I got out of the car and I ran up to the door, same door I'd walked through 100 times before. It's never locked. And I rapped 3 times on the door like I always did. I opened the door and I said, hey guys, it's me. And Toby's wife walked past and said, glaring at me, you're not supposed to be here. And I said, yeah, I know. I'm just here to say goodbye to my friend. I understand you guys are going to Japan. She didn't answer me. She just walked. They were in the process of moving. And so they were packing stuff. Their house was in disarray from getting ready for the move, putting things in boxes. And Toby must have heard my voice because he came out of the bedroom and down the hallway. And I was shocked by his appearance. And that was that he was always very meticulous about his appearance. I was kind of a slob, but he was always, starch uniform, haircut within regs, shoes were shined. He was that kind of guy. And he looked terrible. He was just a train wreck. He had a growth of beard and his hair was all wonky, and he had on a dirty t-shirt and dirty jeans and was barefoot. Now, I cut him some slack because he's moving and it's dirty work and can be. But I was just shocked at his appearance. And I think I was shocked to see him again for some reason. And he walked up to me and he was a little shorter than I was. And I felt it would be appropriate to slap the guy in the back and kind of give him a short embrace and say, good luck, man. Have a good tour in Japan. It's been nice to work with you for 3 years. You'll be missed. But I didn't do that. And I felt uncomfortable, and I don't know why. And I held out my hand for a handshake at the same time he did, and we kind of missed one another, and then we managed this inelegant kind of handshake. And I said, I just want to wish you well, man. I know you're going to Japan. I just want to say it was a pleasure to work with you. And that's as far as I got. And he looked up at me, and he had tears in his eyes. He wasn't crying, but his eyes were teared up. And he said, it happened, didn't it, Terry? And I said, yes, my brother, it really happened. You're not losing your mind. And I could smell alcohol in his breath. I don't mean like a beer. It smelled like liquor on his breath. And that was very out of character for him. And his eyes were bloodshot. And then he asked me, yeah, but why us? And something about that question left me feeling stunned. And I looked down at my shoes and broke my gaze with him. And I said, man, I don't have a clue. And that's the last thing I said. I ran out the door and got in the car with my wife and we went home. And I didn't find closure from that. All I found from that was a very unsettled feeling.
Did you ever find anyone that Toby had confided in that you got to hear about via the grapevine of the experience that he felt that he had back in the day? Or was that you've never come across anyone yet?
Well, what happened was that he was out of there and went to Japan. I tried to keep it a secret and not talk about it with anyone other than my wife. And I did that. All my years in the law, I never shared it with a single colleague, not one, because I couldn't trust anyone. All it would take is a slip of the tongue, and my government position would have been over. My career would have been over. My peers in the legal community would have thought I was crazy, And but now that I'm retired, I could care less. So,
Okay, so
Toby,
Toby.
yes, I'm sorry. We lost contact with him when he moved to Japan. And then a year and a half later, I was out of the Air Force and in Michigan and in school. And my wife made contact, or his wife, Toby's ex-wife, made contact with us and called and talked to one, because our wives were good friends. And she told us that she had left Toby. They separated shortly after they went to Japan, and she brought the kids back and kept custody of them, and then divorced and was remarried to a guy who drove trucks across the country. And she called to tell us that, they were going to be near Detroit where we lived. And they had a load to deliver in Detroit. They'd been married 2 years. She had never gone on a ride with him. And they sent the kids to grandparents, and she was going to take this 2-week vacation and ride with him across the country and drop off and pick up loads. And so they came to see us. And I got to ask about Toby. It was a little bit uncomfortable awkward because her new husband was there. So I didn't want to devote all the conversation to her ex, but I wanted to know what happened to Toby. And she told me that Toby had a decline in that, and I could understand this. As I said earlier, I don't deny having my struggles too. He was a drinker. He turned into a drinker. And at first it was, a shot of vodka at night to get to sleep. And then it was 2, and then it was 3. And she said, he never went to bars. He never drank during the daytime, but he was nervous when the sun went down, and he would just pound vodka till he would pass out. And he did that every night. And I kind of understand that. I think we're vulnerable when we're asleep. They took us when we were asleep. So I still sleep with a light on.
Had Toby again discussed anything with his wife on what he had seen that night, or what he had recollected at all? Was there any of those discussions with his wife?
She was hesitant to talk about the camping trip, other than to tell me that Toby told her that this was all my idea, which kind of explains why she was so rude the last time I saw her. And I assured her, no, this was your ex-husband's idea, not mine at all.
Do you think she knows about the book now?
I don't know. I couldn't find her. I would love to have found her. I'd love to have had a chapter devoted to her and her life. But I don't know. Remarried, changed names.
So let's get to the implants then. So you had one foreign object above the knee and another foreign object below your calf muscle. Is that right?
That's right. The square structure that looks manufactured with 2 wires attached to it was above my knee. And the structures below my knee they believe were bone tissue. And the radiologist said to me, he noted 2 things. He said, hey, I've never seen bone tissue spontaneously sprout in the middle of a muscle before, much less multiple pieces of bone tissue, and then arrange themselves in a symmetrical pattern. He said, this is something I've never seen before. And then in regard to the thing above my knee, he said that that's a manufactured device. Well, obviously it is. It's not part of the human body. And we were in the x-ray room, and he said, you have to have a scar on your leg. And I said, doctor, I don't have a scar there. And he said, yeah, you had to have an injury of some kind for this thing to get into your leg. It couldn't violate the integrity of the skin and be buried as deep in your leg as this thing is and not leave a scar. That's impossible. And I took my pants off again, and he examined my knee, and there is no scar. And he was visibly upset by that. And I asked him, doctor, how often is it that you find an object like this in the human body and there not be a corresponding scar? And he said, never. He said, I've been a radiologist 23 years. He says, I don't know how this thing above your leg got into your knee, And he says, and I've never seen bone tissue like you have below your knee. And his diagnosis was abnormal knee. And in the body of the radiology report, he mentions two anomalies, one above and one below my knee. And I should mention that I get all of my care through the Veterans Administration, which of course is an entity of the United States government.
And you were able to have the x-rays?
Oh, I do. I had to threaten to take them to court to get them. And they took 24 films that I counted of my leg. And I ordered them, and they told me they didn't have them, couldn't find them. And I told them, look, if you guys don't come up with my x-rays, I'm going to file an action in the United States District Court in Dallas. I know how to do that. And, we'll go to court over the matter, and I'll take it to the Dallas Morning News, and I'll scream it from the rooftops. And I want my films. And this is 90 days down the road. So finally, after we had that conversation in person with the custodian of records, they had my films the next day, and they gave me exactly 3. And I said, wait a minute. Where are the rest of the films? And they're like, well, the rest of the films were poor quality and they were discarded. And, how do you disprove that?
On your website, there's the image from the x-ray, and it shows sort of some sort of device, doesn't it? Just explain that device. So it's like 2 wires coming out, and it's some sort of square object?
Yes, it's a square object about the size of a fingernail. And it's obviously an electrical device of some kind. It has 2 wires that run vertically up my leg. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, this lay directly, this device, the square thing, was in that spot that would go numb every time I ran and hit that 2-mile mark. And then it would go numb and then fade. Yeah, it was absolutely a man-made structure. As a matter of fact, I had a guy I went to law school with, went to work for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and they investigate bombings. And they had investigated the Lockerbie, Scotland bombing in 1989.
Oh, yes, the Pan Am.
And what they did was they traced that to a radio. The device, the explosive device, was hooked up to a radio that was purchased in Pakistan, and they were able to trace that by these little electronic pieces, resistors, transistors, whatever they put inside electrical devices. And they have the largest database in the world of electrical devices. If it's an electrical device, a little transistor, a little whatever, resistor, whatever, it'll be in their database if it's manufactured worldwide. And they did a search. My friend did a search for me and said, there's nothing in the database that matches what you have in your leg.
Okay, so you discovered this, what, in 2012?
No, sometime later, about 2014.
2014. And is that device still there now?
No, it's not. The device above my leg was taken out by ET, and I know this is hard to understand. It was taken out by in October of 2017. I trying to have it surgically removed, and I have had a couple of heart attacks, and I have a stent in my heart. And whenever I saw the surgeons would always tell me, go get a cardiac clearance letter, something in writing that, given your heart condition, that it would be that you'd be able to tolerate this without risk or major risk. And they wouldn't do that. I couldn't find, and it's the standard of care in this country, I couldn't find a cardiologist who would give me the blessing to have the surgery. And they explained, and I guess it makes sense. It's a risk versus benefit analysis. These things have been in my leg, I believe, since 1977. I can't honestly say that they caused me any harm. Yeah, they're anxiety producers. I want them out of my leg. But like the cardiologist, one cardiologist, I saw 6. One cardiologist told me, in the VA system, there are 50,000 guys walking around out there with a piece of metal in their leg from from Afghanistan or Korea or whatever, and they want that out of their body too. But we don't do that because it is a risk versus benefit analysis. To take them out of your body requires anesthesia. It opens up your body to the possibility of infection. And for those reasons, it's just not done. So I had made in late October 2017, I had made arrangements with a surgeon in Tijuana, Mexico, to have this thing removed. And he didn't ask for a cardiac clearance letter. He said, you'll sign a release and you'll assume the risk. And because I knew I was near the end of my book and I wanted this thing in my hand and I wanted to have it and I wanted to be disclosure to be part of that. And I told him, I said, when I get down there for the surgery, it has to be done under a forensic protocol, like you were removing a bullet from a crime scene or something. It has to go with a chain of custody from your hands to whoever my designated agent is there to accept it. So there's no possibility of me switching things or, I can't be accused of anything. What happened then was I had a visitor in my room. I woke up in my living room. I explained this in Incident at Devil's Den. I woke up in my living room in the middle of the night in late October 2017, and there was a woman dressed in black with a red kind of scarf around her neck, and she had on this cheap black wig and big dark sunglasses. And I woke up there. I woke up sitting in my in my living room, and I have never sleepwalked in my life. And I was like, what am I doing here? And I look around, I glance to my left, and the alarms are all set. And my cat is all chill on the sofa. But here's this stranger in my house. And I had that sensation of calm. I didn't scream. I didn't grab a gun. I didn't do anything. She sat in a non-threatening posture. And my first thought was, I wish she'd take those glasses off. And she did. And she looked familiar. And I immediately felt feelings for her. Not in a romantic way, but in a maternal way. And as I study her face, I realized that this was the same woman. And she looked the same as she did, 50 years ago, or whatever it was. When I was 4, 5, 6, 7, whenever they would take me sporadically as a kid, and I'd go into that white dome playroom, this woman was always there, like a caregiver or a teacher or something. And this was the same woman. And she spoke with me telepathically again. And she said, you can't have the thing above your knee removed. And because my host, she used the word host, H-O-S-T-S, will not allow it to fall into the hands of terrestrial scientists. Now, the word hosts kind of threw me because it can be a noun, it can be a verb. You can host a dinner party, you can be a host. You could be a host in a symbiotic parasitic relationship. I mean, there's all kinds of meaning to the word. And I said, who are your hosts? And she said, you call them aliens. I call them my hosts because they're not alien to me, which I thought was kind of poetic, but that's what she told me. And she said, don't have surgery. And she also said that you shouldn't talk about this or write a book. And my thought was, will ET be mad at me? And she said, no, your government will not be happy with you. So that was the advice I had. And I proceeded to go with the surgery and scheduled it for first week in December. On November 17th, I woke up my usual time, 8 a.m. in the morning, in terrible pain. I had pain in the top of both of my legs. And I had a deep puncture wound. They bruised later on. There was bruising around them. But I woke up with these very deep puncture wounds. I mean, I could spread them apart and see deep into my leg, and there wasn't a drop of blood. And the things never got infected, and they healed in about a week. And maybe intuitively, I don't know, without those missing films, I don't know how far up my leg those wires went. But I told my wife, I think they came and they took these things out of my leg last night.
And then what was the proof that they did? Was there another X-ray?
There was. I was determined that I was going to get an X-ray that day. So I went and found a chiropractor because I know that they look at 100 films a week. And I took copies of my X-rays showing the structures in my body. And I waited my turn. I didn't have an appointment to see the guy. And I went back and he's like, where do you hurt? And I dropped my pants and I showed him the puncture wounds to my leg. And he's like, how did you get these? Were you in an accident or some kind? I said, no, I woke up with them. And I said, Doc, I'm going to be very honest with you. I was abducted by aliens in 1977. And I believe that they put an implant in my leg. And I think that they came and retrieved it last night. And that's as far as I got. And he kind of went, okay, I think we're done. I don't think I can help you. And he's got me by the elbow and he's leading me toward the front door. And I held up, they were on copy paper. I held up these two images in front of him. And I know these guys know how to look at an X-ray. And 3 feet from the front door, because he thinks I'm crazy, 3 feet from the front door, he stops and he takes the papers and he said, follow me. And we went back to his office and he said, tell me about these. And I gave him the capsule version. And he said, I'm going to order an X-ray for you. I'll pay for it. You don't use my name or the name of my clinic. And that X-ray showed that the thing above my knee was gone, but there were 2 additional things. There are 2 wires now next to my femur that weren't there before. And they're deep and they're tiny, but they're very clear and visible on the X-rays. And I asked this doctor, I said, Doc, if these things are so far advanced, why would they be so inept as to leave these wires in my body? And he gave me a curious answer. He said, they don't do anything by accident. He said, what they probably did was give you an upgrade. This is probably the 2017 model of the 1977 model they originally put in your leg. And that was his answer. And
Well, I suppose the difference with your stuff is that you've got a lot of evidence. You show the X-rays on the website. You've got a lot of proof backing your claims up. What do you think about others that are in this field that come out as whistleblowers, and you must know that they're not? You must know that there's very ungenuine stories out there, or do you feel that way at all? Do you feel how do you discern from?
I can discern. I feel that I can discern, and when I meet someone who, and again, I don't want to discredit, take away from anyone's story. I can only tell you what I think. And when I meet somebody like Calvin Parker or Travis Walton or Whitley Strieber, when we meet, there's an immediate connection. I mean, we are on the same page. And, we can sit down and talk for hours. When I meet someone who's disingenuous, I can generally tell that because, I'll give you a real quick example, real quick. I had a gentleman tell me that he was studied at Harvard Medical College, and that they wanted to study his brain because he'd been taken so many times. And I said, yeah, Harvard. I've been there. What city is that in? And he couldn't tell me. And I asked him, I said, is that place called Imo's Pizza still there? And he looked kind of panicked for a moment, says, yeah, the great pizza. I said, yeah, sure enough. And of course, it's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he couldn't tell me that. But he knew the name of the college. So I don't know.
So are you happy then that you released the book, even though that you were told, not to release the book, not to get the operation, but, you saw the books through?
I am thrilled that I released the book. I'm thrilled that I can talk about it. And I think the more vocal I am, the more visible I am, the safer I am. And that's how I feel. So,
what do you think the phenomena is? Just very quickly in 2 minutes, what do you think what do you think this is in nature? Is it something that's beyond our conceptualization, almost something conscious, spiritual, all of everything and much more?
There may be a spiritual component to this. I don't know what that might be. I know this. My subjective experiences are absolutely real to me, and I think what we're experiencing is from non-human entities that are maybe 500 rungs up the evolutionary ladder from us. And I think it's going to be a worldwide epiphany whenever this whenever this breaks.
At the same time, though, when you say that, when you describe your story about how it, what it did to your friend, the destruction that it did to your friend as well, on a personal level, how can we be ready? I mean, has that attitude changed, do you think?
My attitude is somewhat softened over the years. And, Dr. Bug, if I could sit down and have a beer with Dr. Bug, I think he would tell me, no hard feelings, man, just doing my job. I really think that under their code of ethics, that if you hurt someone, but then you suppress the memory, that's okay. That's what I think. My assumption. I don't know, but
Okay. Well, listen, Terry, what is a really important message? I've got less than a minute. What's an important message that you can give us?
have an open mind. Listen to this and have an open mind. Believe if you want or not believe, but watch the news, have an open mind, and give it some thought, please.
Okay. Well, Terry, your website, your books have been coming up on the screen. One more time, your website is?
TerryLovelace.com.
Excellent. Well, Terry, I just want to thank you for sharing your story with us. And there was a lot that we left out, but in the time that we have shared, I think we got some of the most important bits out as well. So I appreciate you coming on, and thank you for sharing what is one of the, well, I would say one of the top, most incredible stories that I've heard so far in this field from someone with your background. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the forum and the chance to speak to your audience. Thank you.